Good morning and welcome to episode 86 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined, as I am each and every Friday, by Hacker. You can catch him on Hacker After Dark each weekday from 8 to 10 p.m. on 1010XL and 92.5 FM radio. Hacker, welcome back to the show. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, appreciate it, Gus. What a week, man. What a crazy, crazy week here in Jacksonville.
Indeed. Yesterday on Thursday's show, episode 85, me and I went through each of Jacksonville's 9 new free agent additions from this week. And so we handed out grades for each of them. You can go back and listen to that one. Hacker, I don't necessarily need a grade for each signee from you, but before we get into the conversation of what do the Jaguars do next, what do you think of their moves that they made this week by bringing in their 9 free agents?
Look, I know some people are underwhelmed. There wasn't the, quote, splashy names, but I really like what they did. I thought it was interesting. James Gladstone, the GM, he said many, many times they wanted to raise the floor of the roster.
Yeah.
Well, let me translate that, okay? that's sugarcoating it, what James Gladstone is saying. Let me translate what that means. It means the bottom half of this roster was awful, okay? And they wanted to do something about that. And they brought in 9 guys. And I do think now the floor, if you will, has been raised. I really like the 2 offensive linemen. De'Ami Brown, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid on him. I saw enough of him in the playoffs to be intrigued. I think, and it's a 1-year, prove-it deal for him.
Mm-hmm.
I think he could have a really nice year here. Jordan Lewis, by all indications, Dallas really wanted him back, and he opted to sign in Jacksonville. So I'm going to trust in James Gladstone. I'm going to trust Baselli and Liam Cohen in the new process, and I think they improved this team.
Yeah, and I think they did the right thing by not making that splash signing, honestly. The Bears and the Vikings, I feel like were probably the 2 most active teams throughout the week, and I feel like they've been getting the highest grades on free agency report cards from national reporters, and they quote unquote won free agency. But I think Gladstone had a quote earlier, if not yesterday, at his press conference when he and a select few of the Jaguars' 9 new free agents spoke with media. I don't know if it was yesterday or some point earlier in the offseason, but Gladstone has said that he's not trying to win the offseason. And that's a good thing because, typically when you do stuff like that, you end up with contracts like Christian Kirk and Brandon Sheriff and Foye Oluokun, and I don't know, the 2022 Jaguars class is kind of a good example of what not to do because they assigned so many guys to just get them into the building and objectively overpaid. And at this point, Foye Oluokun is the only member of that 2022 free agency class that's still on the team. And I think that they only gave out $20 million guaranteed, I think was the most guaranteed money they gave for any contract. And for context, Gabe Davis got $24 million guaranteed on his deal last year. And so I like the approach, even though they did go kind of not crazy, but they did all their action on Monday, the very first day of the negotiation window. And they had 9 different guys, which is a pretty good amount, but they didn't really get crazy with any of those specific names or players. And as you said at the top, and as Gladstone said at the beginning of this press conference yesterday, it was about raising the floor of the team.
And a couple things really stood out. Number one, they also haven't re-signed any of their own free agents. What does that tell you? All right. They haven't brought anybody back. So, I mean, Blake Hance, Luke Farrell, Mac Jones, Brandon Sheriff, Andre Sisco, go on down the line. They haven't brought anybody back.
Yeah.
So that goes to show you what they thought of the bottom part of the roster. Number 2, the whole Cooper Kupp thing. I know people are upset about that. I don't think he's coming to Jacksonville. James Gladstone was in Los Angeles for 9 years. Up until 3 weeks ago, he was in those personnel meetings with Les Snead. Obviously, Cooper Kupp put on Twitter at the Super Bowl that he knew he was going to be released. James Gladstone knows more about Cooper Kupp than anybody in this city. So I'm going to trust in James Gladstone. If he thought Cooper Kupp had something left in the tank, I think they would have pursued him. Because it appears they're not pursuing him, I think that speaks volumes. So, yeah, I have no issue with what they've done. I understand people are underwhelmed by it. But, again, I'm old enough to remember, Gus, when the Tennessee Titans brought in Calvin Ridley and L'Jarius Sneed and Lloyd Cushenberry and Kenneth Murray and all these guys last year, right? The Titans won the offseason. And how'd that work out? They're picking number 1 in this year's draft. So just pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that anyone should be upset about the lack of a splash signing. I do think that the one complaint from Jaguars fans that is fair is the lack of additions to the defensive line. They didn't sign anyone that would be able to be a pass rusher. They made, I think it was just the 2 defensive additions, and they were both in the secondary. And so yesterday, James Gladstone said, with pro free agency, we wanted to set ourselves up so we feel like we have the flexibility to address any position we want to at any pick that lies on the horizon. We feel like we're in a position to do that. But then he also said later, the very last question, I think this was actually a question from Mia about like the lack of additions to the defensive line room. And he said, we've got 10 picks in this year's draft. We're going to have some spots that are actually open for them, the rookies, to get inserted into. So if you add a veteran at this point, could just be standing in the way. We're going to allow these rookies to get a chance to get out on the field and help us this coming fall. So like it almost a little bit feels like contradictory, because like the Jaguars like filled a hole and kind of like raised the floor by signing like Robert Hainsey to be their potentially starting center over Luke Fortner. But at the same time, like they could draft an interior offensive lineman who could theoretically start right away. But I don't know. I guess with offensive linemen, you do really need the stability, since you're hypothetically going to have 5 set starters for the whole season, barring injury. And with the defensive line, it's obviously more of kind of like a group unit. It's not you just have the first 4 guys and that's who you're leaning on. But I don't know. I feel like the right strategy for this would be to both sign a pass rusher and draft multiple pass rushers. And of course, there is the caveat that, as I mentioned on the show before, like the defensive line class typically like waits around for the second and third waves of free agency. So it is possible that the Jaguars are kind of like waiting around, being patient, and are going to go like bargain hunting at the position. But with all that said, Hacker, what do you think? Do you think that they definitely should have added a pass rusher by this point? Or do you think that as long as they add a pass rusher in free agency at some point this offseason, that'll be good enough? Or do you think that if they just draft pass rushers, that's fine by you?
No, I think you need to draft one, and I think you probably need to add a veteran in free agency. Something Trent Baalke just flat out refused to do the last 2 off seasons. I think you need a third edge pass rusher, and I would also draft one. But I kind of like, what, Gus, and you and I have talked about this, but I think it's becoming more and more apparent. The narrative from some people that this is a retooling and not a rebuild, man, they're 5-18 in their last 23. James Gladstone and Liam Cohen, obviously they can say whatever they want to publicly. Look at what they've done. They brought in more outside free agents than anyone. They haven't re-signed any of their own in-house free agents.
Mm-hmm.
They have 10 draft picks. They're going to retool or reshape half of this roster, all right? Teams that retool aren't 5-18 in their last 23. They're just not. So I think it's closer to a rebuild than it is a retooling. Now, I don't know if you rebuild because you have Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. and Trayvon Walker and Hines Allen. I mean, the top of the roster is very, very good.
Yeah.
But obviously, positions, 25 through 53 needed a lot of work, which is what they did in free agency. So I think the Jaguars can be competitive this year, but I hope people realize what was inherited here. And what was inherited is a team that was the worst team in football record-wise over the last season and a half.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think especially for people who like maybe wanted a splash signing. I was talking to a buddy yesterday who said like he was saying he likes the McCarry signing at offensive line and understands the Hainsey signing, but he would have really liked a splash signing just to be able to protect Trevor Lawrence, since obviously he is the priority. But I agree with your point where like it's a little bit of a slower process. They're more rebuilders than retoolers. And I think the biggest sign of that to me was the fact that they let go of both Evan Engram and Christian Kirk. I think that the vast majority of people in Jacksonville thought like decent chance they let go of one or the other, but letting go of both of them would be surprising. And I think that the main reason we found it surprising is that we thought that this roster was pretty close to at least playoff contention, not necessarily Super Bowl contention, but it was good enough to like make 1 or 2 like smart moves in the offseason, and then you can win the division next year. And so I do like the Jaguars that like I'm sure they would agree with everyone else that they want to protect Trevor Lawrence and like don't want to just have like a lost season considering the talent that they do already have at premium positions on their roster. At the same time, I think they're taking kind of the right approach by like not just trying to win the 2025 AFC South. They're trying to win Super Bowls for a long time, hypothetically. And so I think they're taking the right kind of like long-term approach in doing so. But I am interested because I think we both agree that they, even if it's not this coming like today or this coming week, it would make sense to sign a veteran pass rusher. Are there any names that stick out to you that are still available on the market?
I mean, Calais Campbell, see if he has anything left. That would be nice for him to probably finish out his career here in Jacksonville. My man from Kansas City. What's his weird last name?
Yeah,
Uh,
Charles Omen Omen
yes. I,
Omenihu.
I'll let
Omenihu.
you say it. Yes.
Okay.
A guy like that, because look, you're not bringing a guy. I'll tell you another one, a Jacksonville native, DeMarcus Walker, is another guy I would be very interested in from
I think
formerly of.
he just signed with the Seahawks yesterday, but I agree generally that it would have been a good signing.
Oh, Walker did sign with the Seahawks.
I'm pretty sure. Or no, I'm thinking of DeMarcus Lawrence. I apologize.
Yeah. No, DeMarcus Walker's available, I
Okay.
believe, as of 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I would take DeMarcus Lawrence too, by the way. But reasonably, DeMarcus Walker's another guy because look, anybody you sign here, you're signing for them to play 20 snaps, right?
Mhm.
You're signing. I mean, they're not going to start. They're not Hines Allen. They're not Walker. Odds are you're going to draft a defensive lineman relatively early in rounds 1, 2, or 3. So anybody you sign is literally a third down pass rush specialist or would play due to injury or is a rotational piece. So yeah, you kind of wait for free agency to kind of filter out a little bit before you sign guys like that. So, but there are still some guys on the market, absolutely. But I think you sign, say, DeMarcus Walker as an example, and then you draft a defensive end in round 2 or that first pick of round 3. And at that point, I think then you're pretty good, right? You got Hines Allen, Trayvon Walker, a veteran like DeMarcus Walker, let's say a high third round pick. You still got guys like Miles Cole who might develop. I mean, who knows? But I think another wide receiver is in play too, relatively early in the draft. Because as it stands right now, Parker Washington, Gabe Davis, De'Ami Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., you need at least one more, maybe two more, but at least one.
Yep.
And then I wouldn't rule out offensive line. But again, Gus, if you take an offensive lineman at 5, who's the odd man out, right? I mean, right now it looks like Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland, Robert Hainsey, Patrick McCarry, Anton Harrison. Well, whoever you're drafting at 5 is going to start. Let's say it's Will Campbell.
Yeah.
So then where does Will Campbell play? Does he bump out Walker Little? Do you move Little to guard and do something with Ezra Cleveland? I mean, I don't know. That would be an interesting situation.
Yeah, no matter what happens there, like you would be if Will Campbell started over any of those guys, then all of a sudden you'd be having a guy on the bench that's making like at least $7 million a year, if not closer to like 15 million a year, and that's just probably not the best way to go about building a roster. And so, yeah, my question for you, I guess, or before I get to my question for you about the drafts, I'll also add Zadarius Smith as an interesting name. I think he's definitely like a popular name, and I'm sure a lot of people are aware of it. But I think that in viewing like the Jaguars' free agency class so far, one thing they definitely valued a ton was versatility. Eric Murray can be a good special teams player, but also play a couple different spots in the defense. Jordan Lewis will probably be the starting nickel, but they think he can also play outside. McCarry, I think seems like the signing Gladstone was most excited about yesterday because of his versatility. He mentioned that like that type of versatility doesn't come around at that like price point very often, so they seem pretty happy about that. De'Ami Brown, I think they can line up in a few different spots, and so Zadarius Smith, I think if you're looking at any pass rusher, and Calais Campbell, I think is the same way where he's like a defensive tackle, but you could give him some edge snaps if you really needed to. And I actually think Calais and Zadarius Smith, despite their ages, both performed pretty well last year. And again, like Zadarius is the kind of guy, like the inverse of Calais, I guess, where he's a edge player, but you can certainly line him up on the inside to take advantage of some mismatches. So would certainly like to see some kind of pass rush signing at some point, but not really sure if/when that'll come. But in terms of the draft, Hacker, I feel like Gladstone might have kind of like conveyed not just to Jacksonville, but to all 31 other general managers that they were planning on taking a lot of rookies and like building their pass rush, not entirely out of rookies, obviously, because they've got some talented starters, but they're going to really address pass rush in the draft. And so do you think that he was like basically saying like Mason Graham is going to be the pick at 5th overall if he's there? Or do you think that they will have a little bit more flexibility than that?
No, I think defensive line is certainly in play at 5. Look what he did in LA. I mean, Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Byron Young. I mean, he has a track record of taking guys to affect the opposing quarterback. He signed 9 guys in NFL in pro free agency. Not one of them is a pass rusher, even on the defensive line entirely. So I think they've tipped their hand. The defensive line is going to be a priority. And when it comes to the draft, Gus, I mean, they have 10 picks overall. They got 6 in the top 125. You need to hit on those 6. I mean, if you have 6, I mean, do the math on that. Let me do my Wolfson High School math here. 30 times 6, right? You're talking about 180. You add another 12 to that, 192. So teams are supposed to have 6 picks in the top 192. The Jaguars have 6 picks in the top 125. Thank you to Trent Baalke. He did do that right with 2/3 and 2/4. You need to hit on those 6. And would it surprise you at all if minimum two, but maybe 3 of those 6 are somewhere along the defensive front?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. And now I'm actually looking it up, the Rams draft history, because they definitely have taken a lot of pass rushers. I'm trying to figure out, it looks like they did take Steve Avila, the interior offensive lineman, early in the second round in 2023. But that is the only offensive lineman that the Rams have selected in the first 2 rounds since Joseph Noteboom in 2018. So that's a pretty interesting trend that the Rams have certainly prioritized pass rush over pass protection in early rounds of the NFL draft. But I am really interested to see how they end up spending like those mid-round picks, the 3rd and 4th rounders, because I think that there's positions of need like offensive line and wide receiver that might not be as big of needs as pass rush, but they're definitely going to address those positions. And the fact that the Rams have had success with those position groups, especially wide receiver in like the middle rounds, obviously Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua come to mind, but even Jordan Whittington was a solid rookie last year. Tutu Atwell just signed a 2nd contract with the team. It seems like they know what they like in terms of like the middle round receivers. So I'm excited to see, assuming they don't pick a wide receiver in the first 2 rounds, I'm excited to just see who they end up with and who kind of like fits their mold. But that's kind of all the questions I had for you, Hack. Is there anything else that you're kind of like looking forward to for the rest of the offseason for the Jaguars after this first week of free agency?
I mean, it's crazy that here we sit. The season ended 10 weeks ago, right? And it doesn't even feel like we've had an off season. This has been the craziest 2.5 months that I can almost ever remember when it comes to the Jaguars, from the coaching search and how frantic that was, the GM, right into the combine, right into free agency, being the most active team in free agency, all the rumors about this and that. And here we sit in mid-March. We're now all of a sudden 6 weeks to the NFL draft. The players come back for off-season work. The off-season program begins in 3 weeks. I mean, it is wild how quick all this has transpired. And it's fun. It's been fun for us on Duval Rundown, on Hacker After Dark, every show on 1010XL. And no, if it's been this crazy to this point, it wouldn't surprise me if it gets even crazier heading into the draft.
Absolutely. Well, we will sleep in May, but until then, we'll definitely have shows for you each day here on Duval Rundown, or the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube, as well as obviously our radio station, 1010XL. Hacker, thanks as always. Have a good weekend, man.
Gus, you too, pal. Take care.
All righty. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. I will be back at 9:04 a.m. on Monday to bring you another mock draft. Maybe I'll make a trade with the Saints. Maybe I'll stay at 5 and take Mason Grant. That's probably what I'll do. But you'll have to tune in on Monday to find out. See you guys then.